weather in Florida these days?
Oh, it's beautiful this week. 75, sunny, going up to 80 something over the weekend. Baruch Hashem. My daughter's coming next week with her
Nice.
twins. Yeah, can't
Joy,
wait.
joy.
Thank you. Thank you. How's it in Toronto?
It's actually, pretty mild. It's supposed to get up into the, what do we say in Celsius? I don't. It's gonna be in the
Five,
50s,
six? Okay.
double
That's pretty
digits
good.
Celsius. Yeah,
We had
yeah.
that last week here.
So yeah, for the winter, I mean, winter's over half over, and
Yeah, yeah. Thank God.
okay, let's get started. Schar dira misiba mesuyemet, or sorry, sachar dira misiba mesuyemet, v'achar kach nitbatla hasiba. A guy rents an apartment, and then, because he had a reason to rent an apartment, and then he no longer needs the apartment, and so he's contractually obligated. What are his halachic rights or his obligations? So kibalti tafkid shel minahel michelka be'achad hamisradim b'bnei Brak. I got a job as an administrator from some organization, from one of the offices in Bnei Brak. ולשם כך הזכרתי את הדירה שלי בירושלים כדי שאוכל לשכור דירה בבני ברק. And so I rented out my apartment in Jerusalem so that I could rent out an apartment in Bnei Brak. It looks like we're going to move. הסוחר והשכנים ידעו שאני עוזב את ירושלים ומזכיר את הדירה שלי רק בגלל התפקיד החדש. So the renter who's renting my apartment in Yerushalayim, and all the neighbors, I've, let people know what's going on. They know that I'm leaving Jerusalem, renting out my apartment because I've got this new job. והנה שבוע לפני מסירת הדירה, קיבלתי תפקיד מכובד יותר בירושלים. Okay, so a week before giving over the apartment, okay, we've already signed the new lease, I assume. A week before I have to vacate the apartment and give the keys over to the new tenant, I got a better job in Jerusalem. Can I nullify the rent contract, the rental agreement? So let's take a look at the response. What do you do in that situation? I mean, these things happen all the time. So you got to make it worth his while, usually, is what we usually would say. So you may lose your deposit in the other place. And what are you going to do with this very anxious tenant to get into your apartment? Just got to let him know, I'm really sorry, but the deal fell through. You probably have to pay him something. Cash for keys, yeah.
No. Okay. Terminate a tenancy by paying off the tenant. Let's say you want your kid to come back into the apartment, you're the tenant, you can pay them off as a settlement. They agree.
If they agree, if they don't agree.
Yeah, no. They don't agree.
Well, here the tenant hasn't occupied the apartment yet, the new tenant. So, okay. הגמרא אומרת במסכת קידושין מעשה באדם אחד שמכר כל נכסיו שהיו בחוץ לארץ, כי תכנן לעלות לארץ ישראל. So we have a story in the Gemara about a person who sold all of his assets in chutz la'aretz. Sound familiar? Because he's planning on making aliyah. Okay? Uvishah shemochar lo amar lakona shehu mocher al da'as la'alos la'eretz Yisrael. When he sold all of his assets, he did not disclose that he was doing so because he was making aliyah. Acharei shemochar et kol nechasav karelo ones v'lo hitzliach la'alot la'eretz Yisrael v'ratzo levatel et hamecher. So after selling all of his stuff, a mishap occurs that precludes him from making aliyah, and he wants to nullify the sale. Upasak Rava, the Kaven Shalo Hitna Beferush Shu Mocher Rak al Dat She'olela Eretz Yisrael, Afilu Shebelibo Haya al Dat Zeh. He says, and Rava in the Gemara Paskins, that since he did not stipulate explicitly that this sale was contingent upon his making aliyah, this is therefore called, even though he knew in his heart that that was the situation, because he felt confident that he was moving, this is called dvarim shebalev. These are things that are purely of the heart and cannot be included in any kind of condition of the sale. Dvarim shebalev enam dvarim. And these are things that are null and void. They don't have any substance. Aval im piresh bishat hamechira shu machar et kol nechasav al dat lalos laeretz Yisrael uvesof lo Allah, hamecher mitbatel. But if he tells the buyer that I'm selling everything because I'm making aliyah, and then he ends up not making aliyah, he does have grounds to nullify the sale. He can basically say, even and the question, of course, is he telling the fellow this just because he wants to share the good news that he's making aliyah, or does he have to stipulate that this sale is contingent upon my making aliyah? So obviously the tone is very, very different. Vafilu shelo asa tanai kaful hamecher batel. He says, and this is true even if you didn't stipulate it as a double-formed conditional statement. The Gemara in Kiddushin actually talks about this idea that in many situations of transacting with a stipulation, you have to stipulate the condition in a double way, which means if I end up, getting $100,000, so then I'm going to buy your car. But if I don't end up getting $100,000, then I'm not going to buy your car. That's what we call a Tanai Kaful, where everything is made very, very explicit, both sides of the contingency. And we learn that out from Bnei Gad u'Bnei Reuven, that when the Torah in Parshas Matos tells us the story that Moshe was willing to allow these two tribes to have a portion in the Transjordan, he made a Tanai Kaful. If you come and fight with us, then we'll give you the portion of land in the Transjordan. And if you don't come and fight with us, then you forfeit your rights of the land on the Transjordan. So Moshe was very explicit, giving both sides of the condition. But he says, in this case, you don't need a Tanai Kaful, you don't need a double stipulation. He says, because there are things where the person only needs to reveal the basis on which he's making the transaction. Because then it becomes self-explanatory that the whole basis of the sale is because he's making aliyah or because of whatever the situation is. And the footnote just says that with real estate, you don't need a Tanai Kaful. The Chach Pasak Maran b'Shulchan Aruch, and that's how the Mechaber paskins in the Shulchan Aruch. Misha machar chatzero osadehu, piresh bishat hamechira, shuhu mocher kedei lalechet lamakom ploni. If a person sells his courtyard or his field, and he says that he's selling his real estate because he's moving, areza kemocher al tanai, then it's as if, or even though he's just disclosing this information because of just wants to make nice, friendly conversation, it's as if you're selling the real estate on the condition that you're going to actually end up moving. And if it turns out that he's not, for whatever reason, ends up not moving, so then, if he ends up not moving, he can simply contact the buyer, give him back his money, and take and repossess the property. Aval hamocher stam. Now the question is that true even if the buyer has already taken possession? Has already got the keys, right? Like you said, Marvin, cash for keys. Aval hamocher stam, afal pisha omer shahaya belibi limkor al dad zeh. He says, but if a person sells without explanation, even though he says later to the buyer, well, I only was selling my house because I was planning on moving, lo yachol levatel tamekach ki dvarim shebalei ve'enam dvarim. Then he cannot nullify the sale because matters of the heart that were never disclosed are not legal. Now, I would think that in many situations, it's self-explanatory. If you put up your house for sale, isn't it implicit that you're selling your house not because you're planning to live on the street, right? You're planning to move to another place. So how explicit or implicit must it be? We all sell our homes because we plan to move to another home.
Rabbi, many
Yes,
many people sell. I'm sorry. Many people sell on conditional
yeah,
sale on the condition that I'll buy this home on the condition that I sell mine.
yeah. There are, right. You can include that in the contract, right? That's true. The question is, does it have to be explicitly written in the sale document? So he's saying that even if it's just disclosed verbally, that's enough, at least halachically, to nullify the sale. It may not be enough from a secular law point of view. Definitely not.
Now, incorporates all the terms and conditions of the contract, and there are no other misrepresentations or warranties outside it.
Right,
So
right.
you have to put it all in
Okay, so let that be a lesson to you all. Yeah. Yeah. B'yatera mizu, he says even more than that, Hosif HaShulchan Aruch, da'afilu im lifnei ha'mechira amar shehu mocher al das laleches lamakom ploni, o mishum siba acheret. The Shulchan Aruch adds something really interesting, which is, again, in conflict with secular law. Even if before the sale takes place, a guy mentions to his neighbor, I'm making aliyah, and I'm going to put up my house for sale. And then his neighbor decides he wants to buy the house. When they come to sign the agreement, the seller says nothing. He does not stipulate that he's selling it because he's making aliyah. So in that situation, the Shulchan Aruch says that you cannot nullify the sale. In other words, there are limitations to this disclosure. You must disclose at the time of the sale. If you disclose before the sale, that's not good enough. So, because if at the time when you sign the agreement, no stipulation is made, so then that's not valid. V'lachein b'mikra shalanu, im bishat hachatimat hachozeh hamaskir amar shu maskir lo et hadira, keven shu tzarich lekabel et hatafkid b'bnei v'rak, yachol lachzor bo. So, if at the time that the lease agreement was signed between the Jerusalem occupant and the guy who's going to lease his apartment, the Jerusalem landlord and the guy who's going to lease his apartment. So if he said at the time when they were signing the agreement, it's a good thing that you got lucky because I have to take this job in Bnei Brak and that's why I'm relocating. So if at that moment that was that verbal disclosure, so then he could retract on the deal. Aval im b'shata chatima lo amar kein, but if at the time of the signature of the lease he did not say that, afilu shehadavar yadua shu tzarich lekabel et hatafkid b'bnei brak, eno yachol lachzor bo. Even though it's clear that the lease is being signed because he's moving to Bnei Brak and now it falls through, but since he didn't say that explicitly at the time that the lease agreement was signed, he cannot go back on the deal. Okay, so we're going to hold it here because we got to go to Davin. but we'll have to figure out what a person's supposed to do. What legal rights does he now have if he wants his apartment? You know, and I guess maybe he's going to have to pay off the guy some way. That guy hasn't moved in yet, but he has the legal right because he has a signed lease. It could be. We haven't really seen anything yet. Okay, hold it for today.
Thank
Have
you.
a great
Yes.
Shabbos, a good Chodesh.